The castle of Ravenscroft stood like a jagged wound against the pallid moon, its towers piercing the night sky as though attempting to bleed the very heavens. For 8 centuries it had loomed over the village of Thornwick, a constant reminder of the ancient pact made between mortals and the creatures who ruled the darkness. The villagers spoke of it only in whispers, their voices dropping instinctively whenever they cast their eyes toward the mountain upon which it perched. Within its walls, King Vladimir Ravencrest walked the empty corridors, the sound of his footsteps absorbed by the ancient stones beneath him. His pale fingers trailed along the cold wall as he moved, feeling every imperfection in the masonry, imperfections he had memorized over his 700 years of existence. The immortal king had long since stopped counting the winters that had passed since his transformation, but the weight of them hung upon his shoulders nonetheless, invisible yet heavier than any crown. The castle's great hall stood empty, save for the enormous throne carved from obsidian, veined with crimson that caught the firelight like trapped blood. Vladimir settled into it, his tall frame fitting the contours that had molded themselves to him over centuries. His dark hair fell in waves past his shoulders, framing a face that had been called beautiful by those who did not know better, and terrifying by those who did. "Your Majesty," came a voice from the shadows. Nikolai, his most trusted advisor, emerged from the darkness as though born from it. "The delegation from the Eastern Covens awaits your audience." Vladimir's lips pressed into a thin line. "They bring more complaints about territory, I presume. They bring news of the Silverblood Rebellion, sire. 3 more of our kind have fallen." Silence settled between them, thick and oppressive. The Silverblood Rebellion had grown from a minor annoyance to a genuine threat over the past decade. Humans who had discovered ways to make their blood poisonous to vampires, organizing into hunting parties that targeted isolated members of the vampire nobility. What they lacked in strength, they made up for in cunning and desperation. "Show them in," Vladimir commanded, straightening his posture. The weight of leadership never lifted, even for an immortal king. Before Nikolai could respond, a commotion echoed from the castle's lower levels, shouts and the pounding of feet against stone. A guard burst through the doors, his usual composure shattered. "Your Majesty, intruders at the eastern gate, humans!" Vladimir rose in a single fluid motion. Humans daring to breach Ravenscroft itself. Their audacity grows tiresome. His voice remained calm, but his eyes flared with crimson light. "Seal the castle. Let none escape." The next hours passed in a blur of violence and precision as the Vampire King's guards captured the intruders. 5 humans had somehow managed to scale the castle walls, an impossible feat that spoke of inside help. 4 were captured alive, but 1 had fallen to his death from the ramparts, his body broken on the jagged rocks below. In the dungeon, Vladimir personally interrogated the captives. Their silver-laced weapons had been confiscated, their arms bound with enchanted shackles that prevented escape. 3 men and 1 woman, all bearing the mark of the Silverblood Rebellion. A small silver scar deliberately cut into the web between thumb and forefinger. "Did you truly believe you could infiltrate my home and survive?" Vladimir asked, his voice echoing against the damp stone walls. The oldest of the men spat at the king's feet. "We are but the first wave. The tide rises against you, bloodsucker." Vladimir moved faster than human eyes could track, his hand closing around the man's throat. "Your rebellion has claimed the lives of my people. Tonight, I shall claim yours." His fangs extended, razor-sharp and gleaming in the torchlight. The man's eyes widened in terror, but his defiance remained. "My blood carries the silver blessing. Drink from me, and it will be the last thing you ever taste." Vladimir smiled, a cold expression devoid of mirth. "We shall see." He sank his fangs into the man's neck, drinking deeply. The taste was bitter and metallic, but Vladimir had fed from poisoned vessels before. The man's struggles weakened as his life drained away, his companions watching in horror. It wasn't until Vladimir released the corpse that he felt the first burn in his veins. This was not the mild discomfort of ordinary silver blood. This was agony spreading through him like wildfire. He staggered, one hand reaching for the wall to steady himself. "A new formulation," gasped the woman captive, her eyes alight with triumph despite her circumstances. "Refined over years, even the mighty vampire king cannot withstand it." Vladimir's vision blurred as pain lanced through his body. With the last of his strength, he called for Nikolai, who appeared instantly at his side. "Take me to my chambers," he commanded through gritted teeth, "and bring the court physician." The next 3 days passed in a haze of agony as Vladimir's immortal body fought the silver poison. The court physician, Dr. Lazarus, himself a vampire over 500 years old, worked tirelessly, trying every ancient remedy and modern concoction at his disposal. "The poison is unlike anything I've encountered," Lazarus admitted on the third night, his face grave. "It has bound itself to your blood in a way I cannot undo. Your Majesty may need to consider—" "Consider what?" Vladimir rasped, his once powerful voice now weakened. "The transfusion ritual," Lazarus replied, his tone solemn. "It has not been performed in 3 centuries, but it may be your only hope." The ritual was dangerous and forbidden, requiring the complete drainage and replacement of a vampire's blood with that of a human possessing rare qualities. Most humans could not survive the process, and finding one with the right blood composition was nearly impossible. "Begin testing the prisoners," Vladimir ordered, each word a struggle, "and send word to the village. I require 20 volunteers." Nikolai bowed and departed, his face betraying his concern. The king they had all believed invulnerable now lay weakened, perhaps dying. If word of his condition spread, the kingdom would be vulnerable to not only the Silver Blood Rebellion, but also rival vampire courts who had long coveted Vladimir's territories. In his feverish state, Vladimir dreamed of his human life, fragments of memories from 7 centuries past. A village by the sea, the face of a woman he had once loved, the weight of a mortal sword in his hand. These images, long suppressed, bubbled to the surface of his consciousness like corpses rising from the depths of a lake. 4 more days passed. The prisoners proved unsuitable for the ritual, their blood tainted by the very silver compounds that had poisoned him. The volunteers from the village were tested one by one, each failing to meet the necessary criteria. Vladimir grew weaker with each passing hour, his immortal flesh beginning to grey and wither. On the 8th night, as hope dwindled, the castle guards brought news that a group of travellers had been intercepted on the road leading to Thornwick. Among them was a girl of 16 or 17, apparently an orphan seeking employment in the village. "Bring her to Dr. Lazarus," Nikolai ordered, desperate for any possibility of saving his king. The girl was escorted to the physician's chambers, her threadbare cloak and mud-spattered boots speaking of a long journey. Her hair was the colour of burnished copper, falling in tangled waves around a face that might have been pretty had it not been so gaunt with hunger. Her eyes, however, were remarkable, the palest green, like sea glass held to the light. "What is your name, girl?" Dr. Lazarus asked as he prepared his instruments. "Eleanor," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady despite being surrounded by the inhuman residents of Ravenscroft. "Eleanor Blackwood. Do you know why you've been brought here?" She glanced at the guards flanking the door. "I was told the castle required servants, that there would be payment." Lazarus exchanged looks with Nikolai. "Yes, there will be payment," he said carefully. "But first, I must take a small sample of your blood. A mere pinprick. It will hardly hurt." Eleanor extended her arm without hesitation. "Will this secure me a position?" "That depends on the quality of your blood," Lazarus murmured as he pricked her finger and collected a drop on a glass slide. The moment the blood touched the testing solution, it changed colour in a way none of the other samples had, turning from crimson to a deep, luminescent purple. Lazarus stared in disbelief. "Impossible," he whispered. "After all this time, what is it?" Nikolai demanded. "Her blood, it has the Luminara quality. I haven't seen it in 400 years. Lazarus looked at Eleanor with new interest. Girl, where do you come from? Who were your parents? Eleanor stiffened. I never knew my parents. I was raised in the St. Magdalene's orphanage until it burned down 3 months ago. I've been traveling since, looking for work. Nikolai stepped closer, studying her with newfound intensity. St. Magdalene's in Eastmere? Yes, she replied, growing increasingly uncomfortable under their scrutiny. What does this have to do with employment? Everything, Nikolai said. You may be the only one who can save the king. Eleanor was brought before Vladimir that same night. The king's chambers were vast and opulent, yet permeated with the unmistakable scent of decay. Candles flickered in their sconces, casting long shadows across the enormous four-poster bed where Vladimir lay, his once magnificent form now diminished. So, this is the miracle, he said, his voice barely audible. An orphan girl with Luminara blood. Eleanor stood at the foot of the bed, her hands clasped before her to hide their trembling. In the dim light, she could see that the man, the creature before her, was dying. His skin had the translucent quality of parchment, with black veins visible beneath the surface. They say my blood can heal you, she said, meeting his gaze directly. Vladimir's lips curved into what might have been a smile. They say many things in this castle, child, not all of them true. He studied her face with apparent effort. Tell me, do you offer your blood willingly, knowing what I am? Eleanor hesitated before answering. I was told there would be payment. Enough to start a new life. Ah, Vladimir's eyes, sunken but still unnervingly bright, narrowed slightly. So it is commerce, not compassion, that brings you to my bedside. I have little use for compassion, your majesty. It has never fed me nor kept me warm. Something flickered across Vladimir's face, surprise perhaps at her bluntness. You are unusual for a human. Most would be cowering in terror. Terror serves no purpose when negotiating, Eleanor replied. What exactly will this ritual entail, and what is my compensation? Dr. Lazarus stepped forward from the shadows. The transfusion ritual will require all of your blood, exchanged gradually for the king's poisoned blood. The process is uncomfortable, but with the Luminara quality, you should survive. Should? Eleanor's composure slipped momentarily. There are no guarantees with blood magic, Lazarus admitted. But if successful, your blood will purify His Majesty's and restore his strength. In return, you will receive 100 gold sovereigns and the king's protection for the remainder of your life. Eleanor turned back to Vladimir. And if I refuse, then you will leave this castle with 10 gold pieces for your trouble, Vladimir said weakly. I do not force humans to sacrifice themselves for me. That is not how I have ruled for 7 centuries. Eleanor was silent for a long moment, weighing her options. Finally, she nodded. I accept the terms of the ritual. Preparations began immediately. Eleanor was taken to a chamber adjoining the king's, where she bathed and was given a simple white gown to wear. Servants brought her a meal finer than any she had ever eaten. Roasted meats, fresh bread, and fruits that must have been brought from far away given the season. As she ate, she could not help but reflect on the strange turn her journey had taken. When she had set out from the ruins of St. Magdalene's, she had hoped for nothing more than a position as a scullery maid or laundress. Now she sat in a vampire king's castle, preparing to give her blood in a ritual that might kill her, or make her richer than she had ever dreamed possible. The ritual chamber was deep within the castle, a circular room with a domed ceiling painted with celestial charts. In the center stood 2 stone tables, positioned side by side and connected by an elaborate system of silver and glass tubes. Ancient symbols were carved into the floor, forming concentric circles around the tables. Eleanor lay on one table, Vladimir on the other. Dr. Lazarus moved between them, checking the apparatus one final time. The ritual will take until dawn, he explained to Eleanor. You must remain as still as possible. I will administer a tincture to help with the pain, but you must stay conscious throughout. Eleanor nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. From her position, she could see Vladimir's profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the hollow beneath his cheekbone. Despite his weakened state, there was something regal in his bearing, something that spoke of centuries of command. As the first needle pierced her skin, Eleanor gasped. The pain was sharp but brief. She watched, fascinated and horrified, as her blood began to flow through the glass tubes, its unusual purple luminescence casting an ethereal glow throughout the chamber. "Luminara blood," Lazarus murmured, almost reverently. "The legends say it comes from those descended from angels." "I doubt angels would abandon their child to an orphanage," Eleanor replied through gritted teeth as the discomfort grew. Across from her, Vladimir made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Perhaps that is precisely what angels would do," he said, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. "Abandon their offspring to the mercy of the world." As her blood flowed into Vladimir and his poisoned blood entered her veins, Eleanor felt a strange connection forming between them, as though invisible threads were being woven from her consciousness to his. With each passing hour, the sensation grew stronger. She began to see flashes of memories that were not her own. A battlefield strewn with bodies, a throne room filled with courtiers in medieval dress, a woman with sad eyes standing on a cliff above a stormy sea. "What's happening?" she whispered, her voice faint. "Blood carries memory," Lazarus explained, adjusting the flow of the apparatus. "It is an expected side effect." Vladimir's eyes moved to Eleanor's face. "You can see my past," he said. It wasn't a question. "Fragments," she admitted. "Nothing clear." "And I can see yours," he replied, his voice stronger than it had been before. "The orphanage, the fire, the matron who struck you when you asked questions." Eleanor turned her face away. "Stay out of my memories. They're not yours to see." "Blood knows no privacy, Eleanor Blackwood," Vladimir said softly. "Just as yours is healing my body, mine is showing you truths about yourself you may not be ready to face." She wanted to ask what he meant, but a wave of dizziness overtook her. The room began to spin, the painted stars on the ceiling blurring into streaks of light. "Her heart rate is increasing," she heard Lazarus say, his voice seeming to come from very far away. "The king's body is accepting the blood, but her system is struggling with the exchange. She cannot die." Vladimir's voice was suddenly urgent, stronger than it had been since his poisoning. "Do whatever is necessary." Eleanor felt cold hands on her face, turning it gently. Vladimir's eyes met hers, no longer sunken but bright with renewed vitality, the crimson glow returning to their depths. "Stay with me, Eleanor," he commanded. "Your journey does not end here in this chamber." As darkness crept in from the edges of her vision, Eleanor had one last coherent thought. The vampire king, who had initially looked upon her with dismissive indifference, was now fighting for her survival with unexpected fervor, and somewhere in the blood memories they now shared lay the reason, a secret about her origins that had brought her to this castle, to this ritual, to this moment hanging between life and death. Then consciousness slipped away, and Eleanor Blackwood fell into darkness as the first rays of dawn broke over the towers of Ravenscroft Castle. Eleanor awoke to the sensation of silk against her skin and the distant sound of voices arguing beyond thick walls. Her body felt impossibly light, as though she might float away if not anchored by the heavy bedcovers. Opening her eyes required tremendous effort, and when she finally managed, she found herself in a bedchamber she didn't recognize, spacious and elegantly appointed, with tapestries depicting hunting scenes and tall windows covered by heavy velvet curtains. "She stirs," came a feminine voice from nearby. Eleanor turned her head slowly to find a woman seated beside the bed, pale and beautiful, with silver blonde hair twisted into an elaborate knot at the nape of her neck. She wore a gown of midnight blue, and her eyes held the same unnatural brightness as Vladimir's. "Who are you?" Eleanor's voice emerged as a cracked whisper. "I am Liliana, the king's sister." The woman leaned forward, studying Eleanor with unsettling intensity. "You have been unconscious for 3 days. Many believed you would not wake at all." Eleanor tried to sit up, but found her limbs uncooperative. The ritual was successful after a fashion. Liliana's perfect lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "My brother lives, his strength returning by the hour. You, however, hovered between worlds. Lazarus has rarely left your side." Memories of the ritual flooded back, the pain, the strange connection to Vladimir, the glimpses of his past intertwined with her own. "The king's blood is inside me now," Eleanor murmured, more to herself than to Liliana. "Yes, more than should be possible for a human to survive." Liliana's head tilted slightly, "which raises fascinating questions about what you truly are, Eleanor Blackwood." Before Eleanor could respond, the chamber door opened. Dr. Lazarus entered, followed by Nikolai, their faces registering surprise at seeing Eleanor awake. "The patient returns to us," Lazarus said, hurrying to the bedside. He pressed cool fingers against Eleanor's wrist, counting her pulse. "Remarkable. Your heartbeat is stronger than before the ritual. Is that unusual?" Eleanor asked. "Everything about your case is unusual," Lazarus replied. "No human has survived a complete transfusion with vampire blood in over 3 centuries. Those who did typically took weeks to regain consciousness, not days." Nikolai remained by the door, his expression guarded. "The king will want to know she's awake." "The king has more pressing concerns," Liliana said sharply. "The Eastern covens grow restless, and rumors of his weakness have spread beyond our borders. Let him focus on matters of state while Lazarus ensures the girl's recovery." Eleanor watched the exchange with growing unease. The tension between these vampire nobles was palpable, and she sensed her position in the castle was more precarious than she had initially understood. "I was promised payment," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Once I recover, I intend to leave." Liliana's laughter was like the tinkling of crystal. "Oh, my dear, you misunderstand your situation entirely. No one who carries that much of the king's blood simply walks away. You are now the most valuable and vulnerable creature in the kingdom." "Liliana," Lazarus warned, "you overstep. The king has not made his decisions regarding the girl's future known." "Then perhaps it's time he did." Vladimir's voice cut through the room like a blade. Eleanor had not heard the door open again. Yet there he stood, tall and imposing, his restoration evident in every aspect of his bearing. Gone was the withered figure from the ritual chamber. This was the vampire king in his full power, dressed in black garments trimmed with silver, his dark hair pulled back to reveal the severe angles of his face. Liliana rose and bowed her head. "Brother, we did not expect you to join us." Clearly, Vladimir's gaze fixed on Eleanor, who found herself unable to look away. The blood connection between them hummed like a plucked string. "Leave us," he commanded. "All of you." Liliana's displeasure was evident, but she obeyed, sweeping from the room with Nikolai close behind. Lazarus hesitated. "Sire, the girl still requires medical attention, which I will summon you to provide if necessary," Vladimir replied, his tone brooking no argument. When the door closed, leaving them alone, Eleanor forced herself to sit up despite her weakness. "Your sister seems to think I've become a prisoner here." Vladimir approached the bed, his movements fluid and predatory. "Liliana sees everything through the lens of power and control. It is her nature." "And how do you see me?" Eleanor challenged. "As an enigma." He stopped at the foot of the bed. "Your blood saved my life. Yet by all laws of nature, my blood should have killed you. Instead, you absorbed it, adapted to it. No ordinary human could have done so." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with her physical condition. "What are you suggesting?" "That perhaps the orphanage where you were raised was not a coincidence. That your presence in my kingdom, at precisely the moment I required Luminara blood, was not mere chance." His eyes narrowed. "During the ritual, I glimpsed fragments of your memories, but also gaps where memories should exist." Eleanor frowned. "I don't understand." Neither do I, which is rare and unsettling. Vladimir moved to the window and drew back the curtains. Evening light flooded the room, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. What I do know is that the Silver Blood Rebellion has escalated its attacks. 3 more noble houses have been targeted since my recovery became known. They grow desperate. That is hardly my concern, Eleanor said, though a part of her, the part now infused with his blood, felt a strange resonance with his words. It should be. Vladimir turned to face her again. Because I believe they will come for you next. A human who carries the blood of the vampire king would be a precious prize, to study, to weaponize. Eleanor felt her heart quicken. Then give me my payment, and let me go far from here, where they won't find me. Gold will not protect you from what hunts in the shadows. Vladimir's voice softened slightly. Nor will distance guarantee your safety. The blood bond between us can be sensed by those with the ability. You would be tracked, captured, and your suffering would be substantial. So I am a prisoner, just as Liliana said. Eleanor's hands clenched in the bedcovers. You are under my protection, Vladimir corrected, until we understand what you are and why you were placed in my path. Before Eleanor could argue further, a commotion erupted in the corridor, raised voices, and the sound of running feet. Vladimir moved to the door with supernatural speed, yanking it open to find a guard standing there, his face ashen. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption. There's been an attack on the village. Silver blood hunters, at least 20. They've set fire to the eastern quarter. Vladimir's expression hardened. Gather the royal guard. I will lead them myself. He glanced back at Eleanor. Stay in this room. 2 guards will remain at your door. With that, he was gone, leaving Eleanor alone with the echo of his command and the distant sound of castle defenses mobilizing. Despite Vladimir's orders, Eleanor could not remain idle while chaos erupted. As soon as she was certain no one was coming back immediately, she forced herself out of bed. Her legs trembled beneath her, but she managed to stand, then walk unsteadily to the window. From this vantage point, she could see the village of Thornwick below and the orange glow of flames consuming buildings at its edge. The door opened behind her, and Eleanor whirled around, expecting to see guards sent to force her back to bed. Instead, Liliana stood in the doorway, her face impassive. My brother rushes to defend peasants while leaving his most valuable asset unguarded, she said, stepping into the room and closing the door. His priorities have always been questionable. Eleanor backed away instinctively. He left guards. Who answer to me in his absence? Liliana smiled thinly. Come, girl. We haven't much time. Time for what? To remove you from this vulnerable position. Liliana held out a folded bundle of clothing. Put these on. Quickly! Eleanor hesitated, every instinct warning her not to trust this vampire woman whose cold eyes held calculation rather than kindness. Where would you take me? To safety, away from the castle. Liliana laid the clothes on the bed. The attack on the village is a diversion. Their true target is you, or more specifically, the king's blood that now flows in your veins. How would they even know about me? Eleanor demanded. Castles have ears, secrets have value, and gold loosens tongues. Liliana shrugged elegantly. What matters now is keeping you from those who would use you against my brother. Unless, of course, you prefer to wait here for the Silverbloods to breach our defenses? With reluctance, Eleanor took the clothes, a simple dress of dark wool, a cloak, and sturdy boots. They were plainer than what she currently wore, but more practical for travel. As she dressed behind a privacy screen, she tried to assess her options. Vladimir had ordered her to stay, but if Liliana was right about the attack being a diversion, remaining might prove more dangerous than leaving. How do I know this isn't a trap? She asked as she emerged, fully dressed. That you're not delivering me to the Silverbloods yourself? Liliana's laughter was cold. If I wished you harm, little orphan, I would not need conspirators. But my brother's survival is tied to yours now, a fact I find distasteful, but must acknowledge. The blood bond works both ways. Should you die, he would be compromised. This was new information, and Eleanor filed it away carefully. Then where are we going? To the Eastern Tower. There's a passage few know about, leading to tunnels beneath the mountain. Liliana moved to the door, listening for a moment before opening it. Follow me and speak to no one. They moved through the castle like shadows, avoiding the main corridors where guards and servants rushed about in response to the attack. Liliana led with confidence, occasionally pressing Eleanor into alcoves or empty rooms when others approached. It was clear the vampire woman knew every hidden corner of Ravenscroft. As they climbed a narrow spiral staircase toward the Eastern Tower, Eleanor fought against growing exhaustion. Her body, still recovering from the ritual, protested the exertion. By the time they reached the tower room, a dusty, abandoned chamber filled with broken furniture and forgotten trunks, she was breathing heavily. "You're weaker than I expected," Liliana observed with mild disdain. She moved to the far wall and pressed her palm against what appeared to be solid stone. A section of the wall slid inward with a grinding sound, revealing a dark passage beyond. This leads down to the catacombs and eventually outside the castle walls. There's a carriage waiting at the forest's edge. Eleanor approached the passage warily. "And where will this carriage take me?" "To my private estate in the Western Mountains. You'll remain there until my brother decides what to do with you permanently." Liliana produced a small oil lamp from beneath her cloak and lit it. "Take this. The way is dark and treacherous for human eyes." As Eleanor reached for the lamp, a sudden premonition of danger flashed through her mind. Not her own instinct, but something deeper, something that felt like Vladimir's blood reacting within her. She hesitated, her fingers inches from the lamp. "Something's wrong," she murmured. Liliana's expression shifted subtly. "It's merely your anxiety. Understandable, given the circumstances." But Eleanor was already backing away. "No, you're lying about something. I can feel it." Liliana's beautiful face hardened. "The bond between you and my brother is stronger than I anticipated. Inconvenient, but not insurmountable." She set the lamp down and advanced on Eleanor with inhuman speed. "I had hoped to accomplish this without violence, but adaptability has always been my strength." Eleanor scrambled backward, but in her weakened state, she was no match for vampire reflexes. Liliana's hand closed around her throat, lifting her until her feet barely touched the ground. "My brother has ruled for too long," Liliana hissed, her eyes blazing crimson. "The Eastern Covens support my claim to the throne, but as long as Vladimir lives, I remain in his shadow. Your blood, his blood, will help me sever that bond permanently." "You're working with the Silverbloods," Eleanor gasped, clawing at the hand around her throat. "Not working with them, using them," Liliana smiled, revealing delicate fangs. "They create the chaos. I provide the solution. Once Vladimir falls, I will crush their rebellion and be hailed as the savior of our kind." Eleanor's vision began to darken as Liliana's grip tightened. With desperate strength, she kicked out, her boot connecting with Liliana's knee. The vampire hissed in pain, her grip loosening just enough for Eleanor to break free and stagger toward the door. "Guards!" She tried to shout, but her bruised throat produced only a hoarse whisper. "Help!" Liliana recovered quickly, blocking Eleanor's path to the door. "No one will hear you, girl. The tower is abandoned, the guards recalled to defend against the attack that I orchestrated." She moved forward with lethal grace. "You cannot escape me." As Liliana lunged, Eleanor dove to the side, colliding with one of the dusty trunks. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs, but also dislodged the trunk's lid, which fell open. Inside, Eleanor glimpsed something metallic, a dagger, its hilt wrapped in worn leather. She grasped it desperately as Liliana seized her by the hair, yanking her backward. Eleanor swung blindly with the dagger, feeling it connect with flesh. Liliana shrieked, more in fury than pain, releasing Eleanor to clutch at her wounded arm. Black blood seeped between her fingers. "Insolent creature," she snarled. "I intended to keep you alive until we reached the estate, but I see now that would be unwise." Eleanor scrambled to her feet, the dagger held before her in trembling hands. "Stay back. I don't want to hurt you." Liliana laughed, the sound razor-sharp. "You cannot hurt me, child. That scratch is nothing, but what I will do to you." Her words cut off abruptly as the tower door burst open. Nikolai stood in the doorway, flanked by two guards, his expression shifting from concern to shock as he took in the scene. "Lady Liliana," he said carefully, "the king has returned from the village and asks why his sister left the safety of the castle during an attack." Liliana straightened, composing herself with remarkable speed. "I was securing our guest, Nikolai. The tower is the most defensible position in Ravenscroft." She cast a venomous glance at Eleanor, "though she seems to have misunderstood my intentions." "Indeed." Nikolai's gaze flicked to the dagger in Eleanor's hand, then to the open secret passage in the wall, and finally to the blood dripping from Liliana's arm. His face revealed nothing, but Eleanor sensed he was assembling the truth of the situation. "The king requests Lady Eleanor's presence immediately," Nikolai continued, "and yours as well, my lady." Eleanor kept her grip on the dagger as she edged toward Nikolai, never turning her back on Liliana. The vampire woman's expression was murderous, but with witnesses present, she could do nothing but acquiesce. "Of course," Liliana said smoothly. "We shall attend him together." The walk back through the castle was tense and silent. Eleanor remained close to Nikolai, the dagger now concealed within the folds of her cloak. Her mind raced, trying to process Liliana's betrayal and what it might mean for her own future. If the king's sister wanted her dead, how could she possibly be safe anywhere in the vampire realm? They found Vladimir in the great hall, his clothes spattered with blood, evidence of the battle in the village. He stood over a map spread across a massive table, marking positions with small silver figurines. When he looked up and saw Eleanor, relief flickered across his features before his expression hardened at the sight of his sister. "Explain yourself, Liliana," he demanded without preamble. "Why did my guards report seeing you escorting Eleanor toward the eastern tower?" Liliana stepped forward, her composure perfect. "Brother, I sought only to protect what is valuable to you. The attack on the village was clearly a diversion. I feared the castle might be breached while our forces were divided." "An admirable concern," Vladimir replied, his tone suggesting he found it anything but. "Yet you selected the one tower with a passage leading outside our walls. Curious. A contingency should the worst occur," Liliana countered smoothly. "I would have brought her to your side once the danger passed." Eleanor could remain silent no longer. "She tried to kill me," she said, her voice still raw from Liliana's assault. "She admitted orchestrating the attack on the village as a diversion. She's working with the Eastern Covens to take your throne." The hall fell silent. Liliana's eyes blazed with fury, but she maintained her composure. "The girl is confused, brother. The ritual has affected her mind. Perhaps the exchange of blood has left her delusional, seeing conspiracies where there are none." Vladimir's gaze moved between them, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he circled the table until he stood before Eleanor. "Show me your throat," he commanded softly. Eleanor hesitated, then lowered the high collar of her cloak, revealing the already bruising marks of Liliana's fingers around her neck. Vladimir's eyes darkened as he studied the injury, then looked to his sister. "Those are hand marks, Liliana. Yours, I presume." "She attacked me first." Liliana pointed to her wounded arm. "With a dagger she found in the tower room. I defended myself. After you choked me and admitted your treachery," Eleanor countered. Vladimir raised a hand, silencing them both. "There is a simpler way to resolve this." His eyes fixed on Eleanor's. "The blood bond between us allows for more than just physical connection. If you consent, I can see your memories of what transpired." Eleanor swallowed painfully. "Will it hurt?" "No," Vladimir replied, "but it will be intimate. I will see not only what happened in the tower, but the emotions you felt, perhaps other memories that surface in association." "Do it," Eleanor said without hesitation. "I have nothing to hide." Vladimir placed his cool hands on either side of her face, his touch unexpectedly gentle. "Look into my eyes and think of what happened with Liliana." As their gazes locked, Eleanor felt a strange sensation, as though a door in her mind was being carefully opened. Images flowed between them. Liliana entering her chamber, the journey to the tower, the revelation of betrayal, the struggle that followed. With the images came her fear, her determination to survive, and deeper currents of emotion tied to older memories. The orphanage, the loneliness, her lifelong sense of not belonging anywhere. When Vladimir finally released her, his expression had hardened into something terrible to behold. He turned to Liliana, who had begun edging toward the door. "Guards," he said quietly, "restrain the Lady Liliana. She is charged with high treason against the crown." "This is absurdity," Liliana hissed as guards moved to surround her. "You would take the word of a human girl over your own blood. She has bewitched you, brother." "I took no one's word," Vladimir replied coldly. "I saw the truth through her eyes, truth you cannot disguise." He gestured to Nikolai. "Take her to the obsidian cells. We will determine her punishment after I've dealt with her Eastern Coven allies." As the guards led a struggling Liliana away, her final words echoed through the hall. "This isn't over, brother. The girl will be your downfall." The doors closed behind them, leaving Eleanor and Vladimir in tense silence. She was suddenly aware of how small she felt in this vast hall, surrounded by the trappings of vampire nobility. "You saved my life a second time," Vladimir said at last, his voice quieter than before. "First with your blood, now with your courage." "I saved my own life," Eleanor corrected him. "Yours was incidental." Unexpectedly, Vladimir smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his severe features. "You speak to me as few dare to, another mystery to add to the collection you present." Eleanor touched her bruised throat gingerly. "What happens now?" "Liliana said the blood bond works both ways, that if I die, you would be compromised. She wasn't entirely wrong, though the effect is more nuanced than she suggested." Vladimir moved back to the map table, indicating that Eleanor should join him. "Our blood is intermingled in ways unprecedented. Your safety is indeed tied to my well-being, as mine is to yours, which presents us with a problem." "What problem?" "The Silver Blood rebellion grows bolder. My sister's treachery has likely exposed your existence to our enemies, and now I find myself in the unusual position of having to protect a human whose value may exceed my own." His fingers traced a path on the map. "You cannot remain at Ravenscroft. It's too obvious a target, and I cannot guarantee your safety while dealing with both external threats and internal betrayal." Eleanor felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. "So you're sending me away after all?" "Not away," Vladimir corrected. "With me." He tapped a location on the map, a small structure nestled in mountains far from the castle. "To my personal sanctuary, known to almost no one. There, we will have time to understand what you are, what this blood bond means, and how to use it against those who would destroy us both." "And if I refuse?" Eleanor asked, though she already suspected the answer. Vladimir's eyes met hers, the connection between them humming like a plucked harp string. "You won't. Not because I command it, but because you sense what I do, that our fates are now inextricably linked, and the answers you've sought your entire life lie along this path we must walk together." Eleanor wanted to deny it, to insist she had no interest in mysteries or blood magic or vampire politics. But deep within, in the place where Vladimir's blood now mingled with her own, she knew he spoke the truth. Her origins, her strange immunity to vampire blood, the gaps in her memory that had always troubled her, all were pieces of a puzzle she had never known she was meant to solve. "When do we leave?" she asked simply. "Tonight," Vladimir replied, "under cover of darkness, while my enemies believe I remain at Ravenscroft planning my retaliation." He studied her face, his expression softening slightly. "Rest while you can, Eleanor Blackwood. The journey ahead will test us both in ways neither of us can fully anticipate. As Eleanor looked at the map, tracing the path they would soon travel, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't just heading into the unknown. She was heading home, to a truth she had been running toward her entire life, even when she didn't know it existed. The journey to Vladimir's sanctuary proved more perilous than Eleanor had anticipated. They traveled only by night, taking obscure mountain paths that seemed impossibly steep and narrow. By day, they sheltered in hidden caves or abandoned hunting lodges, places Vladimir had prepared over centuries for emergencies such as this. On the third night, as they picked their way through a dense pine forest, Eleanor broke the silence that had settled between them. "How much farther?" "We'll reach the sanctuary tomorrow night," Vladimir replied, his voice low. Unlike Eleanor, who stumbled occasionally despite the moonlight, he moved through the darkness with absolute certainty. "The final approach is the most treacherous part of the journey." Eleanor pushed a branch aside, wincing as her still tender throat protested the movement. "You never explained why you maintained this secret place. What does a king need to hide from?" Vladimir paused, turning to look at her with those unnervingly bright eyes. "Even kings need solitude, Eleanor. 7 centuries of rule weigh heavily." "That's not the whole truth," she challenged, emboldened by exhaustion and the strange intimacy their blood bond had created. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "No, it isn't. The sanctuary was built before I became king, when I was newly transformed. It was my refuge during the years I learned to control the thirst, to master the darkness that comes with this existence. And now? Now it serves as a repository for knowledge too dangerous for Ravenscroft's libraries. Ancient texts, forbidden artifacts, tools I've collected over centuries that might prove useful in understanding what you are." Eleanor was about to respond when Vladimir suddenly tensed, raising a hand to silence her. His head tilted slightly, listening to something beyond human perception. "We're being followed," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Eleanor froze, straining to hear what had alerted him. The forest seemed peaceful. Too peaceful, she realized. The night creatures had gone silent. "Silver bloods," she whispered. Vladimir shook his head minutely. "Vampires. 3, perhaps 4, moving quickly." He grasped her arm, pulling her deeper into the shadows. "Eastern Coven assassins, most likely. Liliana's allies making their move earlier than I anticipated." They pressed against the trunk of a massive pine, its branches providing some cover. Vladimir's posture was pure predator now, coiled and ready. Eleanor could feel her heart racing, and knew any vampire within 100 yards would hear it. "They'll find us," she breathed. "Yes," he agreed simply. "I could outrun them alone, but not while protecting you." "Then don't," Eleanor said, making a split-second decision. "Fight them. I'll hide." Vladimir studied her face in the darkness. "They'll track your heartbeat. Not if you give them something more interesting to focus on." She pointed to a rocky outcropping 30 yards away. "I'll make it to those rocks. There must be crevices I can squeeze into. You draw them away, deal with them, then find me." For a moment he seemed about to refuse, but then nodded sharply. "When I move, count to 20, then run. Don't stop until you reach the rocks. Don't look back." Before she could respond, he was gone, a shadow melting into deeper shadows. Eleanor counted as instructed, her mouth dry with fear, then sprinted toward the outcropping. The forest floor was treacherous with roots and fallen branches, but adrenaline carried her forward. She had almost reached the rocks when a figure dropped from the trees directly in her path. Eleanor skidded to a halt, nearly falling. The vampire before her was female, slender, but with an aura of lethal capability. Her pale hair gleamed silver in the moonlight. "The king's pet," the vampire purred, her accent marking her as from the Eastern Territories. "How convenient that you've separated yourself from your master." Eleanor backed away slowly. "He's not my master." "No?" The vampire smiled, revealing delicate fangs. "Then what is he to you, little bloodbag? Protector? Savior? Lover?" The last word was spoken with such contempt that Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. "He is my ally against those who would use me." The vampire laughed, a musical sound at odds with the menace in her eyes. "Use you? Child, that's all anyone will ever do with something like you. Vladimir Ravencrest most of all." She moved closer, her movements fluid and graceful. "Did he tell you what became of the last human who carried a vampire king's blood? No. The poor creature served as his private blood fountain for 50 years before finally breaking. They say he kept her chained in his private chambers, feeding from her whenever stronger magic was required." Eleanor continued backing toward the rocks, hoping to find some defensible position. "You're lying." "Am I? Ask him about Eliza Winterbourne sometime, if you live through this night." The vampire lunged suddenly, impossibly fast. Eleanor had no time to dodge, but as the creature's hands reached for her, a dark blur slammed into the vampire from the side, sending both figures crashing into the underbrush. Vladimir rose from the tangle of limbs, his face transformed by battle, eyes blazing crimson, fangs fully extended. With one fluid motion, he plunged his hand into the female vampire's chest and withdrew her heart. The organ pulsed once in his grasp before he crushed it, black blood running between his fingers. The forest erupted into chaos as two more vampires descended from the trees, hissing in fury at their comrade's death. Vladimir met them head-on, his movements too fast for Eleanor to track properly. She seized the opportunity to scramble toward the rocks, searching desperately for a hiding place. She found a narrow fissure between two boulders and squeezed through, scraping her arms in the process. The space beyond was tight, but just large enough for her to curl into. Through the opening, she could glimpse flashes of the battle, Vladimir fighting with primal ferocity against opponents who moved like living shadows. One of the vampires broke free of the melee and darted toward her hiding place. Eleanor pressed herself further into the crevice, but knew she had been spotted. As the vampire reached the rocks, his fingers scrabbling at the narrow opening, Eleanor did the only thing she could think of. She drew the dagger she had kept since the confrontation with Liliana and slashed her own palm. The scent of her blood, infused with Vladimir's, filled the air. The effect on the vampire was immediate and shocking. He recoiled as though burned, hissing in confusion. Then his expression changed to one of hunger, so profound it transformed his face into something barely recognizable as human. "Luminara blood," he whispered, reaching again for the opening, his previous caution forgotten in the face of such temptation. It was exactly the distraction Vladimir needed. He appeared behind the preoccupied vampire, seizing him by the throat and twisting with a sharp, efficient movement. The crack of breaking vertebrae echoed in the forest, and the vampire collapsed, temporarily paralyzed but not dead. Vladimir reached into the crevice, his bloody hand finding Eleanor's. "Come, quickly! The third escaped, but he'll return with others." Eleanor allowed herself to be pulled from her hiding place, wincing as her cut palm made contact with the rough stone. Once free, she saw that Vladimir had not emerged unscathed from the fight. His shirt was torn, revealing deep gashes across his chest that were already beginning to heal. "You're injured," she said, reaching instinctively toward the wounds. "It's nothing." He caught her wrist, his gaze fixing on her bleeding palm. "You cut yourself. Deliberately. It was the only weapon I had." Something complicated passed across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or reluctant admiration. A dangerous tactic. Vampire bloodthirst can override all rationality, especially when presented with blood as rare as yours. "It worked, didn't it?" Eleanor pulled her hand free, tearing a strip from her underskirt to bind the wound. Vladimir watched her for a moment, then turned to the paralyzed vampire. "This one will tell us who sent them before I end him." He hauled the creature up by his collar. "Won't you, Mikhail?" The vampire's eyes widened in terror as feeling began to return to his limbs. "King Vladimir, Save your protests," Vladimir interrupted coldly. "Tell me who ordered this attack, and I'll make your death quick." "The Duchess Ilyana," the vampire gasped. "She allied with Lady Liliana months ago. They plan to divide your territories between them after your death." Eleanor watched as Vladimir extracted every detail of the conspiracy, names of allies, planned attacks, the price that had been put on both their heads. The vampire Mikhail spoke quickly, desperate to earn the merciful death he'd been promised. When Vladimir had learned all he could, he fulfilled his promise with brutal efficiency, decapitating Mikhail with a single powerful stroke. Then he turned to Eleanor, his expression grave. "We need to move faster than planned. The sanctuary is still 6 hours away at human pace." "I can keep up," Eleanor assured him, though her legs already ached from days of travel. Vladimir studied her for a moment, then made a decision. "There's another way." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I can carry you. We would reach the sanctuary before dawn." Eleanor hesitated. The thought of being carried by Vladimir, held against his body as he moved with supernatural speed through the darkness, sent an unexpected shiver through her. "What the female vampire said," she began, needing to ask before placing herself so completely in his power. "About Eliza Winterbourne." Vladimir's expression tightened. "Ilyana has always excelled at mixing truth with lies to create the most damaging poison." "Then tell me the truth." He hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "Eliza Winterbourne was not my blood carrier. She belonged to my predecessor, King Dracul. What happened to her was one of the reasons I led the revolution that ended his reign. And what did happen to her? What Ilyana described, and worse." His voice was flat, emotionless, yet Eleanor sensed the anger underneath. Blood carriers were once common among vampire nobility. Humans who survived transfusion and were kept as living sources of vampire blood. It was a practice I outlawed when I took the throne. "Why?" Eleanor pressed. "Because it was barbaric," he snapped, then visibly composed himself. "Because no living being should be reduced to a vessel, used and discarded. But we don't have time for moral philosophy, Eleanor. My enemies are converging, and we must reach the sanctuary before they find us again." Eleanor nodded slowly, accepting both his explanation and the urgency of their situation. "All right, carry me." Vladimir stepped forward and lifted her effortlessly, one arm beneath her knees, the other supporting her back. Eleanor instinctively wrapped her arms around his neck, finding herself close enough to feel the coolness of his skin through his torn shirt. "Hold tight," he murmured, "and close your eyes, if the speed frightens you." Then they were moving, the forest blurring around them as Vladimir ran with inhuman velocity. Eleanor kept her eyes open despite his warning, mesmerized by the shadowy landscape rushing past. The sensation was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure, like flying just above the ground. They covered vast distances in minutes, Vladimir navigating treacherous terrain without slowing. As the night deepened, they ascended higher into the mountains, the air growing colder and thinner. Eleanor found herself pressing closer to Vladimir's body, seeking warmth despite his preternatural coolness. Finally, as the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hint of approaching dawn, Vladimir slowed. They had reached a sheer cliff face that seemed impassable. "We're here," he said, setting Eleanor carefully on her feet. She swayed slightly, her legs unsteady after hours of being carried. "I don't see anything," she admitted, scanning the forbidding rock wall. "That's the point." Vladimir approached the cliff, running his hands over the stone in a specific pattern. "The entrance is hidden by both natural features and old magic." As he completed the sequence, a section of rock shifted inward with a sound of grinding stone. Beyond lay darkness, but Vladimir stepped forward confidently, taking Eleanor's hand to guide her. "Mind your step. The passage descends steeply for the first 100 yards. They entered the mountain itself, the hidden door sliding closed behind them. For a moment, they stood in perfect darkness until Vladimir touched something on the wall. Soft blue light bloomed around them, emanating from strange crystalline growths embedded in the rock. "What are those?" Eleanor asked, fascinated despite her exhaustion. Moonglass, Vladimir replied, a rare mineral that absorbs sunlight and releases it slowly through the night. The ancients used it to illuminate their underground cities. He led her deeper into the mountain, down a winding passage that gradually widened into a proper corridor with smooth floors and walls covered in intricate carvings. Eleanor tried to decipher the symbols, but they were like nothing she had ever seen. Pre-vampire script, Vladimir explained, noticing her interest. From the civilization that first discovered immortality through blood. The corridor finally opened into a vast chamber that took Eleanor's breath away. The ceiling soared at least 30 feet above them, entirely covered with moonglass that created the illusion of a starry night sky. The chamber was circular, with several levels connected by graceful spiral staircases. Every wall was lined with books and artifacts, some displayed in glass cases, others simply resting on shelves that reached from floor to ceiling. At the center of the lowest level stood a circular pool of perfectly still water, its surface reflecting the artificial stars above. Around it were arranged comfortable furniture, tables covered with maps and papers, and what appeared to be a laboratory set up with vials, burners, and strange equipment Eleanor couldn't identify. "Welcome to the sanctuary," Vladimir said, watching her reaction closely. "My true home, you might say." "It's beautiful," Eleanor admitted, turning slowly to take in the full grandeur of the space. "How old is this place?" "The natural cavern is ancient. I discovered it 3 centuries ago and spent 50 years transforming it into what you see now." He gestured toward an archway leading to another chamber. "There are living quarters through there, bedrooms, bathing chambers, a kitchen stocked with provisions for human needs." Eleanor suddenly became aware of how filthy she was from days of travel through forest and mountain. "A bath sounds like heaven." Vladimir nodded. "Rest and refresh yourself. Once you've recovered, we have work to do." "Work?" "Understanding what you are, Eleanor. The answers lie somewhere in this collection, the largest repository of blood knowledge outside the Vatican's secret archives." Eleanor hesitated, exhaustion momentarily overshadowed by curiosity. "You really believe I'm something special?" "I know it." Vladimir's eyes held hers. "Luminara blood is exceedingly rare, but your ability to absorb vampire blood without dying is unprecedented. Together, those facts suggest something beyond ordinary humanity." "What if I don't want to be special?" Eleanor asked, giving voice to the fear that had been building since the ritual. "What if I just want to be normal? To live a normal life?" Vladimir's expression softened slightly. "Normal lives are for those who aren't being hunted by vampire covens, Eleanor. Understanding your true nature is your best hope for survival, and mine." She nodded reluctantly, accepting the truth of his words even as she resisted their implications. "I'll rest first, then we can begin." Eleanor found the bathing chamber to be a marvel of ancient engineering and modern convenience. A deep pool, fed by a hot spring, with soap and towels laid out as if in expectation of her arrival. She sank into the steaming water with a sigh of pure pleasure, allowing it to soothe her aching muscles and wash away the grime of travel. As she bathed, her mind turned to the events of the past weeks. Her transformation from nameless orphan to valuable blood carrier, the conspiracy surrounding her, and most confusingly, her evolving relationship with Vladimir. He remained an enigma, capable of both terrifying violence and unexpected kindness, ancient and powerful, yet seemingly genuine in his concern for her welfare. And there was the blood bond, a constant presence at the edge of her consciousness. Sometimes, when their eyes met, she could feel his emotions like distant echoes, his determination, his curiosity about her, and something deeper she couldn't quite name. After bathing, Eleanor found clean clothes laid out in the adjoining bedchamber, simple but well-made garments that fit her surprisingly well. The bed looked impossibly inviting, and despite her racing thoughts, exhaustion won out. She was asleep, moments after her head touched the pillow. She dreamed of blood and fire, of running through endless forests pursued by shadows with crimson eyes. In the dream, she reached a clearing where a woman waited, tall and beautiful, with copper hair like Eleanor's own. The woman reached out, her lips forming words Eleanor couldn't hear. But as their fingers were about to touch, the ground opened beneath Eleanor's feet, and she fell into darkness. She woke with a gasp to find Vladimir standing in the doorway of her chamber, his expression grave. "What's wrong?" she asked, instantly alert despite having been deep in sleep moments before. "I've been examining the artifacts that might help us understand your condition," he said. "There's something you need to see. Something I should have recognized the moment I saw your blood during the ritual." Eleanor rose from the bed, following him back to the main chamber. On one of the tables, he had laid out an ancient manuscript, its pages yellowed with age and covered in the same strange script she'd seen in the corridor. Beside it lay a small object, a medallion of tarnished silver on a chain. The design was simple but striking, a circle containing a pattern of intricate swirls that somehow suggested flowing liquid. "What is this?" Eleanor asked, reaching for the medallion. "Careful," Vladimir warned. "It's extremely old and sensitive to blood." She withdrew her hand. "What does it have to do with me?" "This manuscript describes an ancient order called the Sanguine Guardians," Vladimir explained, turning the brittle pages with careful fingers. "Humans with naturally occurring Luminara blood, who served as protectors of the balance between mortal and immortal realms. Protectors. How could humans protect themselves against vampires? Their blood was both healing and deadly, capable of curing vampire ailments, as yours did for me, but also capable of destroying vampires when wielded with intent." He looked up from the manuscript, his eyes intense. "The medallion is a blood key used by the Guardians to access their full powers. It would activate only for someone with Luminara blood." Eleanor stared at the simple silver disc, a chill running through her. "You think I'm one of these Guardians?" "I think you're more than that." Vladimir turned another page, revealing an illustration that made Eleanor's heart stop. The drawing depicted a woman with flowing hair, one hand extended toward a supplicant vampire, the other holding back a crowd of shadowy figures. Around her neck hung the medallion, and above her head was a symbol that matched exactly the strange birthmark Eleanor had carried on her left shoulder all her life. A mark she had always hidden. Instinctively understanding it made her different. "This is the last recorded sanguine oracle," Vladimir said softly. "A guardian born only once every 1,000 years, with the power to not only heal or destroy vampires, but to see through time itself, to witness the past and glimpse possible futures." Eleanor backed away from the table, shaking her head. "No, that's impossible. I'm no one, an orphan, a servant girl, an orphan with unexplained gaps in her memory, who survived a complete blood transfusion with a vampire king, who appeared in my kingdom precisely when needed." Vladimir's voice was gentle but insistent. "There are no coincidences of such magnitude, Eleanor. If what you're saying is true, why wasn't I taught about any of this? Why was I abandoned at an orphanage? Why—" She broke off as a sudden realization hit her. "St. Magdalen's. It burned down 3 months ago, right before I felt drawn to travel to your kingdom." Vladimir nodded slowly. "I believe someone has been protecting you, hiding you until the time was right. Perhaps the fire was meant to force you onto your destined path. Or maybe it was meant to kill me," Eleanor countered, her mind racing. "If I am this oracle thing, wouldn't I be a threat to some vampires? Those who want power like your sister and her allies? You would be the greatest threat they could imagine." Vladimir picked up the medallion carefully, and their most coveted prize, an oracle under their control, could ensure their dominance for centuries. Eleanor stared at the medallion, feeling as though she stood at the edge of an abyss. "How can we be sure about what I am?" "There is one way." Vladimir held out the silver disc. "The medallion will respond only to the blood of a guardian, and will activate fully only for the oracle." Eleanor hesitated, then slowly extended her hand, palm up, revealing the cut she had made during the forest attack. It was barely healed, the scab fresh and fragile. "If I am what you think," she said quietly, "what does that mean for me? For us?" "It means you have a choice to make," Vladimir replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "To embrace your heritage and the power that comes with it, or to run from it. But Eleanor," he paused, something like concern crossing his features, "if you are truly the Oracle, there is no corner of this world where you could hide from those who would use you." Eleanor took a deep breath, then nodded once. "Do it." Vladimir gently pressed the medallion against her wounded palm. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the silver began to warm, its tarnish falling away like dust to reveal gleaming metal beneath. The swirling pattern began to move, the lines shifting like actual liquid under glass. A drop of Eleanor's blood touched the surface, and the medallion blazed with brilliant white light that engulfed her entire body. She gasped as knowledge flooded into her mind, centuries of memories not her own, the faces of guardians long dead, rituals and powers she had never imagined. And with them came the visions, flashes of past and future intertwined. She saw St. Magdalene's burning, but now recognized the hooded figures who had set the blaze. She witnessed Vladimir's coronation centuries ago, the crown placed upon his head by a woman whose face was hidden behind a veil. Most disturbingly, she saw Ravenscroft Castle overrun by Eastern Coven vampires, with Liliana standing triumphant amid the carnage, the severed head of her brother held aloft for all to see. When the visions finally subsided, Eleanor found herself on her knees, Vladimir kneeling beside her, his hands supporting her shoulders. The medallion had somehow fastened itself around her neck, the metal cool against her skin. "Eleanor?" Concern edged his voice. "What did you see?" She looked up, meeting his eyes with new understanding. "Everything," she whispered. "I saw everything. And Vladimir—" She grasped his hands tightly. "Your sister has escaped. She's gathering an army to attack Ravenscroft at the new moon, 3 days from now." Alarm flashed across his face. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I am that I am the last sanguine oracle," Eleanor replied, her voice stronger now, "and that we have been manipulated into this position by forces older than either of us." Vladimir helped her to her feet, steadying her as she swayed slightly. "What forces?" Eleanor touched the medallion, which now seemed a part of her. "The first ones, the original immortals who created vampires as their servants, then disappeared from the world. They're returning, Vladimir, and they need the Oracle to complete their resurrection." The weight of this revelation settled between them like a physical presence. Vladimir's expression hardened with determination. "Then we must prevent that at all costs, beginning with my sister's attack." "We can't fight an army," Eleanor protested. "Not even with my newly awakened abilities." "No," Vladimir agreed, "but we may not have to." He moved to a cabinet across the chamber and withdrew a wooden box inlaid with bone. Opening it revealed a dagger unlike any Eleanor had seen, its blade transparent like crystal, but with veins of crimson running through it. "This is the Fang of Acarus," he explained, "forged from the crystallized blood of the first ones. Legend holds that it can sever the tie between master and servant, between the first ones and those they transformed." Eleanor's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "You think we can use it to free vampires from their influence, to break whatever hold they have over Liliana and her allies?" "It's a theory," Vladimir admitted. "One I've never had the means to test. Until now." He looked at her intently. "The dagger requires activation by oracle blood to reach its full potential." Eleanor felt the weight of destiny settling upon her shoulders. The medallion at her throat pulsed with energy, responding to her emotions. With her newly awakened memories, she understood what was being asked of her and what it would cost. "If I do this," she said slowly, "if I embrace this power fully, I can never go back to being just Eleanor. I'll be the Oracle for as long as I live." "Yes," Vladimir confirmed, "but you will also be the only hope for both human and vampire realms against the return of the First Ones. Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the medallion's power coursing through her veins, mingling with Vladimir's blood to create something new and unprecedented. When she opened them again, her decision was made. "We leave for Ravenscroft at nightfall," she said, her voice carrying a new authority. "We'll need to gather allies along the way, both human and vampire. The battle ahead is bigger than Liliana's coup." Vladimir nodded, a new respect evident in his gaze. "As you command, Oracle." Eleanor touched the fang of Icarus, a vision flashing through her mind as her fingers made contact with the crystal blade. Herself, standing atop Ravenscroft's highest tower, the dagger raised above her head as a storm of supernatural proportions raged around her. At her side stood Vladimir, his face streaked with blood, both red and black. And beyond them, descending from the churning clouds, came figures of such ancient terror that even in vision form, Eleanor could barely comprehend them. The First Ones were coming home. And only the last Oracle with her vampire king stood between them and the world they intended to reclaim. The journey back to Ravenscroft proved swifter than their escape had been. Eleanor rode beside Vladimir, no longer needing to be carried. The Oracle's awakening had transformed her in subtle ways, her movements more fluid, her senses sharper, her stamina enhanced by the power flowing through her veins. The medallion at her throat pulsed with soft light whenever danger approached, giving them ample warning to avoid Eastern Coven patrols that scoured the forests and mountain passes. Along the way, they gathered a small but formidable company of allies. First came a band of rebel vampires led by a nobleman named Cassius, who had opposed Liliana's faction for decades. Then a village of humans who practiced the old ways, recognizing the Oracle's medallion the moment Eleanor entered their hidden valley. By the time they reached the outskirts of Thornwick, their forces numbered nearly 100, pitifully small against the army Liliana had assembled, but strengthened by purpose and ancient magic. From a ridge overlooking the village, they could see Ravenscroft Castle silhouetted against the night sky. Torches lined its walls, and even at this distance, Eleanor could sense the dark energy emanating from the structure, an unnatural power that made the air itself feel heavy and corrupt. "The First One's influence grows stronger," she murmured, the medallion burning cold against her skin. "Liliana has been performing rituals to hasten their return." Vladimir's face was grim as he surveyed his corrupted stronghold. "How many defend the castle?" 300 vampires from the Eastern Covens," Eleanor replied, her eyes unfocused as she consulted the visions that now came to her with increasing clarity. "Plus the castle staff who have been enthralled. Nikolai leads a resistance from the dungeons with 20 loyal guards, but they cannot hold out much longer. And my sister?" Eleanor closed her eyes, reaching deeper into the vision. "In the ritual chamber beneath the great hall. She wears a crown of bone and drinks from a chalice carved from human skull. The portal grows larger with each sacrifice." A muscle tightened in Vladimir's jaw. "Then we have no time to waste. Cassius, position your fighters around the castle's eastern approach. When you see my signal, create as much chaos as possible to draw defenders from the main gate." The vampire nobleman nodded, slipping away to organize his forces. Vladimir turned to the human contingent, led by a grey-haired woman named Meredith, who carried herself with the dignity of one long accustomed to leadership. "Your people know the risks?" he asked her. "We have waited generations for the Oracle's return," Meredith replied simply. "We are prepared to die in her service, if necessary." Eleanor felt the weight of their devotion like a physical burden. These humans had preserved the knowledge of the Sanguine Guardians for centuries, passing down oral traditions and keeping the old symbols alive when all written records had been destroyed. Now they looked to her, a former orphan who had only just discovered her own power, to lead them against horrors beyond imagination. "No one should die for me," she said firmly. "Your role is to protect the villagers of Thornwick. When we breach the castle, Liliana will likely unleash her forces on the innocent as a distraction. Get as many to safety as you can." Meredith bowed her head in acknowledgement, though Eleanor could see she was disappointed not to be joining the main assault. As the oracle commands. As their allies dispersed to their assigned positions, Eleanor and Vladimir were left alone on the ridge. The fang of Acarus hung at Eleanor's waist, its crystalline blade hidden in a sheath of ancient leather. She touched it absently, feeling its resonance with the medallion. "Are you afraid?" Vladimir asked quietly. Eleanor considered the question seriously. "Yes," she finally answered. "But not of dying. I'm afraid of failing, of not being what everyone needs me to be. I've ruled for 7 centuries, Vladimir said, his eyes on the distant castle. And I have never once been what everyone needed me to be. The secret is to be what the moment requires, nothing more." She smiled slightly at his unexpected wisdom. "And what does this moment require of us? Courage, certainly. Cunning, without question." He turned to her, his expression softening in a way she had rarely seen. "But perhaps most importantly, trust. I must trust in your power as oracle, and you must trust in my experience as king. Together we may yet prevail." Eleanor nodded, feeling a curious warmth spread through her despite the gravity of their situation. In the days since her awakening, something had shifted between them, the blood bond deepening into a connection that transcended mere biology. She found herself attuned to his moods, aware of his presence, even when they were physically separated. More disconcertingly, she had begun to see him in her visions of possible futures. Always at her side, their fates inexorably intertwined. "I trust you," she said simply. The attack began an hour before dawn, when the castle's vampire defenders would be at their most complacent, preparing to retire as daylight approached. Cassius and his rebels created the promised diversion, a spectacular assault on the eastern walls with fire and silver-tipped arrows that drew half the castle guard to repel them. Meanwhile, Eleanor and Vladimir approached through the old drainage tunnels that emptied into the moat, a route known only to the king and his most trusted advisors. They moved silently through the dank passageways, guided by Eleanor's visions and Vladimir's perfect memory of his castle's architecture. "The ritual chamber lies directly beneath the throne room," he whispered, as they emerged into the castle's lower levels. "A remnant from before my time, sealed for centuries until Liliana rediscovered it." "She's there now," Eleanor confirmed, the medallion at her throat pulsing with increasing urgency. "And she's not alone. Something ancient watches through her eyes." They encountered the first of Liliana's guards at a junction of corridors, 4 vampires with the vacant expressions of those under supernatural thrall. Vladimir moved with lethal efficiency, dispatching 3 before they could raise an alarm. The 4th lunged at Eleanor, but she was no longer the helpless human he expected. The medallion flared as she sidestepped his attack, her hand catching his wrist. Where their skin touched, light bloomed, intense white fire that spread up the vampire's arm, burning away the corrupting influence that controlled him. He fell to his knees, gasping, his eyes clearing. "My king," he choked, recognizing Vladimir. "Forgive me, their voices in my head. I couldn't resist." "Rest now, Darian," Vladimir said, recognizing one of his royal guard. "Find Nikolai in the dungeons if you can. Tell him we've come to end this." As they pressed deeper into the castle, Eleanor felt the air growing thicker, charged with malevolent energy. The stone walls themselves seemed to pulse with unwholesome life, and strange symbols glowed with sickly green light at every archway. "The veil thins," she murmured, her voice sounding distant even to her own ears. "The first ones press against the boundaries between worlds." They reached the entrance to the ritual chamber, a massive door of ancient oak banded with iron, now emblazoned with the same corrupt symbols that marked the rest of the castle. Eleanor could hear chanting beyond, a guttural language that hurt her ears and made the medallion burn against her skin. "Are you ready?" Vladimir asked, his hand on the door. Eleanor drew the fang of Acarus, its crystal blade catching the sickly light and transforming it to pure white radiance. "No," she admitted, "but the moment requires action nonetheless." With a nod, Vladimir threw his weight against the door. It burst open to reveal a scene from nightmare, the ritual chamber transformed into a temple to abomination. The circular room's floor was carved with a massive summoning sigil, its lines filled with what appeared to be black blood. Bodies hung from the ceiling, drained husks of humans and vampires alike, their life force consumed to power the ritual. And at the center stood Liliana, but not as Eleanor remembered her. The vampire woman's elegant beauty had twisted into something inhuman. Her limbs had elongated, her skin stretched tight over bone, and her eyes had become voids of absolute darkness. The crown of bone upon her head pulsed with the same corrupt energy that filled the chamber. "Brother," she rasped, her voice overlaid with another deeper and infinitely more ancient. "How considerate of you to bring the oracle directly to us." Behind her, a portal shimmered in the air, a tear in reality through which Eleanor glimpsed creatures of such cosmic horror that her mind recoiled. Tentacles of shadow reached through the opening, caressing Liliana's transformed body with obscene tenderness. "Liliana is gone," Vladimir said, his voice tight with grief and rage. "What are you that wears my sister's skin?" A terrible laugh echoed from the thing that had been Liliana. "We are the first ones, little king, the originators of all blood magic, the true masters of this realm. Your kind were made to serve us, to prepare our return. And now, with the oracle's power, we shall reclaim what is ours." The shadowy appendages lashed out suddenly, impossibly fast, seizing Eleanor before she could react. They wrapped around her arms and throat, burning cold like frostbite. The medallion flared in protest, creating a barrier of light that prevented the shadows from touching it. "The girl does not yet understand her purpose," the thing wearing Liliana's face hissed. "The oracle was never meant to oppose us. She was created to be our vessel, our anchor in the mortal realm." Eleanor struggled against the shadows, but they tightened mercilessly. Through their touch, visions assaulted her. Not the controlled glimpses of possible futures she had grown accustomed to, but a torrent of horror. She saw worlds conquered by the first ones, civilizations laid waste, realities twisted into unrecognizable parodies of themselves. And worse, she saw the truth of her own existence, created by the first ones as a living key, her bloodline carefully cultivated through centuries for this precise moment. Saint Magdalene's orphanage had been their front, collecting children with potential, testing them, discarding those who failed to meet their criteria. Eleanor had been their crowning achievement, the perfect oracle, designed to unlock the door between worlds. "No!" she gasped, fighting against both the physical restraints and the terrible knowledge. Vladimir launched himself at the creature that had been his sister, moving with the full speed and power of an ancient vampire king. He struck with devastating force, sending Liliana's transformed body staggering backward. The shadowy tentacles loosened their grip on Eleanor, allowing her to drop to the floor, clutching the fang of Acarus with white-knuckled determination. "You cannot stop what has begun," the creature snarled, recovering quickly. It gestured, and the hanging corpses began to twitch, animated by dark magic. They dropped from their hooks, forming a barrier of undead flesh between Vladimir and his target. Eleanor scrambled to her feet as the corpse guardians surrounded Vladimir. The portal behind Liliana pulsed wider with each passing second, the horrors beyond becoming more distinct. She knew with terrible certainty that if the first ones fully emerged, no power on earth could drive them back. The medallion at her throat burned with increasing intensity, responding to her desperation. Knowledge flooded her mind, not from the corrupted visions the first ones had forced upon her, but from the true legacy of the sanguine guardians. She understood suddenly what the fang of Acarus was truly meant to do, not merely sever the connection between master and servant, but to close the door between worlds permanently. but the price was unimaginable. Eleanor looked at Vladimir, fighting with supernatural grace against overwhelming odds. Their eyes met across the chaos of battle, and in that moment, the blood bond between them flared to life. She felt his determination, his rage, his grief for his sister, and beneath it all, something warmer that had grown between them despite the bizarre circumstances of their meeting. He understood immediately what she intended. She saw it in the momentary widening of his eyes, the almost imperceptible shake of his head. "There must be another way," he called to her, dispatching 2 corpse guardians with a sweeping blow. "There isn't," Eleanor replied, raising the fang of Icarus. "This is what the moment requires." Before he could reach her, she slashed her palm with the crystal blade. Her blood, Luminara blood infused with Vladimir's immortal essence, flowed along the dagger's length, igniting the veins of crimson within the crystal. The fang blazed with power, becoming a beacon of pure light in the corrupted chamber. "No!" shrieked the thing wearing Liliana's face, abandoning its fight with Vladimir to lunge toward Eleanor. "You were made for ES." "I was made to end you," Eleanor countered, her voice resonant with newfound certainty. She thrust the blazing dagger toward the portal, her blood creating a connection between the physical weapon and the tear in reality. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The portal began to collapse inward, the tentacles of shadow retreating as though burned. The creature that had possessed Liliana howled in fury and despair, its hold on her physical form weakening as its connection to the other realm was severed. Vladimir seized the opportunity to reach his sister, pinning her transformed body as she thrashed and cursed in the ancient language of the First Ones. "Eleanor, the dagger." Eleanor understood what he needed. With the last of her strength, she tossed the fang of Icarus to Vladimir. He caught it one-handed and pressed the blood-illuminated blade to Liliana's forehead. Light spread from the point of contact, burning away the corruption that had taken root in her. Liliana's body convulsed, then went limp. The bone crown crumbled to dust, and her features slowly returned to their natural state, beautiful once more, but marked by the horror she had endured. The portal continued to collapse, but Eleanor realized with growing horror that it had become unstable, not simply closing but preparing to implode with enough force to destroy the castle and everything within miles. The medallion at her throat pulsed in warning, showing her the devastation that would follow. There was only one way to control the collapse. "Get her out," Eleanor commanded Vladimir, who cradled his unconscious sister. "Get everyone out of the castle. Not without you," he growled, his eyes fierce. "I must complete what I've begun." She touched the medallion, which now burned with the same intensity as the dagger. "This was always my purpose, Vladimir. Not to open the door for them, but to close it forever." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by a refusal so profound it transcended words. He laid Liliana gently on the floor and moved toward Eleanor, intent on taking her from the chamber by force if necessary. But Eleanor raised her hand, and the power of the oracle flowed through her in a wave that froze him in place. "Please," she said softly, "let me do what I was born to do." Their eyes met one final time, the blood bond between them singing with emotion too complex for words. Then Eleanor turned to the collapsing portal, raised her hands, and embraced her destiny. The medallion merged with her flesh, becoming part of her chest, directly over her heart. Its power flowed outward, containing the portal's implosion, drawing it inward instead of allowing it to expand. Eleanor felt herself being pulled toward the narrowing opening, her very essence becoming the seal that would lock the First Ones away for eternity. As the last of the portal closed around her, Eleanor caught a final glimpse of Vladimir's face, proud and devastated and understanding all at once. Then there was only light, endless and perfect, as she passed beyond the veil of the physical world. Days later, when the dust had settled and the survivors had begun to rebuild, Vladimir stood alone in the ritual chamber. The castle had been cleansed of the First One's corruption. The bodies of the fallen given proper rites, the living comforted as best they could be. Liliana, freed from possession but haunted by what she had done while under its influence, had retreated to a sanctuary in the mountains to atone through centuries of contemplation. The place where the portal had stood was now marked by a perfect circle of white crystal, like diamond embedded in the stone floor. In its center lay the fang of Acarus, its once transparent blade now permanently suffused with crimson light. Vladimir knelt beside this memorial, his fingers tracing the crystal's smooth surface. The blood bond between him and Eleanor had not broken with her sacrifice, a phenomenon that defied all vampire law. He could still feel her presence, distant but undeniable, somewhere beyond normal perception. "The Oracle's sacrifice has not ended her story," came Meredith's voice from the doorway. The human woman approached carefully, showing appropriate respect but not fear. "Our oldest texts speak of cycles, of returns." "Meaning what exactly?" Vladimir asked, not looking up from the crystal circle. "Meaning that what passes beyond the veil may someday return through it," Meredith replied. "Perhaps in a year, perhaps in a century. The Oracle's power transcends normal boundaries of life and death." Vladimir finally looked up, his expression guarded, yet holding a spark that had not been there before. "You believe she will return?" Meredith smiled gently. "I believe, my lord, that some bonds cannot be broken by mere dimensions, and I believe the first ones will not remain contained forever. When they stir again, the world will need both its oracle and its vampire king." She bowed and left him to his contemplation. Vladimir remained kneeling beside the crystal circle, his immortal patience now given new purpose. If there was even the slightest chance that Eleanor might return, in a year, a decade, a century, he would be waiting. The blood they shared would guide her home, and until then he would guard the seal she had created with her sacrifice, ensuring that her triumph remained intact. It was, after all, what the moment required, and what the moments to come would demand of them both. In the infinite light beyond the veil, Eleanor Blackwood drifted in perfect awareness. Her consciousness expanded beyond human understanding. She perceived all of time and space as a tapestry of interconnected possibilities, and in every thread that represented a potential future, she saw the same constant, Vladimir waiting, believing, keeping faith in her return. "Until then," she whispered into the void, knowing somehow that he would feel her words in the depths of his immortal heart. "Until then, my king."